Oh, perfect.
Good.
I think so. Good evening. Good evening, everyone. My name is Vivian Tork. I'm a sophomore here at Hillsdale, and I'm studying history and biology. And today I have the privilege of welcoming Dr. Phillip Kline. Phillip D. Kline is the director of the Amistad project at the St. Thomas More Society. He received his Bachelor of Science from the University of Central Missouri and his JD from the University of Kansas Law School, where he served as the associate editor of the Kansas Law Review and the editor of the Kansas Criminal Justice Review. A former Johnson County district attorney, Mr. Kline served in the Kansas House of Representatives for the 18th District from 1993 to 2001. In 2002, he was elected Attorney General of Kansas. As Attorney General, he authored Kansas's Jessica's Law, increasing penalties for child predators, and established a cybercrimes task force that put over 100 internet predators of children in prison. It enhanced the criminal division of the office, leading to over 60 successful murder prosecutions, and successfully argued before the United States Supreme Court. Please join me in welcoming Mr. Kline.
History inspired, and the patience of God allowed the confluence of events, leading to a radical expression of a common identity, a written word which marshaled the imagination of humankind to a divine truth and gave birth to a nation, which in turn, over time, lit the torch of liberty for the world. As with the entirety of human history, a divine promise was gifted to a flawed people. We hold these truths to be self-evident that all persons are created equal, endowed by their Creator with certain inalienable rights, and that among these is life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. To secure these rights, governments are instituted among men, deriving their just powers from the consent of the governed. I remember the first time I visited the National Archives in Washington, D.C., and I saw the Declaration of Independence kept in a vault. The parchment on which it is written is so fragile that it would crumble if exposed to oxygen. The document cannot stop a bullet. It cannot stop a sword. The power of that document is only present if the truths reflected in the words resonate in the heart of a people. And now America. And now America, unfortunately, appears to be peopled with individuals who proclaim there is no truth beyond self, not only obliterating the connection between the individual and God, but also erasing the bonds we have with one another. All conflict, all debate, all expression no longer reflect a mutual endeavor, but rather a play on power to gain authority and advantage over others. We cannot define a common good, for virtue is lost and the center no longer holds. America, historically a Christian nation, was radical in its middle way, birthing institutions and assigning responsibilities, reflecting our striving to live truth intermingled with grace, and thus reflecting and honoring the intrinsic value of every single human being. But now America is increasingly shaped by a narcissistic bred individual isolation, and the soul of the nation is becoming hollow. The election of 2020 was the most lawless election in United States history. But it is not the cause of this erosion of American virtue. It is but a symptom. The cause is much deeper. Its roots reaching into our institutions of higher education, the practice of law, and the exercise of governmental power. In America today, we worship government and not God. In doing so, just as Scripture admonishes, we turn over our wealth, our creativity, our sons and our daughters to our new king, government. For where our hopes rest, so will our treasure rest. Nancy Pelosi, speaking on the January 6th riot, referred to those who invaded the Capitol building as invaded the sacred chamber of democracy. Our political discourse, reflecting this new secular worship of government, is about fear and false hope, demonizing those who differ and promising that which can't be delivered by government. First, we've never been a democracy. A democracy without virtue is two wolves and a sheep deciding what's for dinner. The sheep will always get eaten. We have the most anti-democratic document in human history called the Bill of Rights, and it states, if I desire to worship and you disagree, I may worship. If I speak and you disagree, I may speak louder. No, we are not a pure democracy. And certainly the Capitol building is not a shrine to secular humanism religion. For a constitutional republic to persist, it must have a self-evident truth at its foundation to constrain government power. And without truth, constraint is lost. And so secondly, if government proclaims itself as the truth rather than as constrained by the truth, it assumes jurisdiction over all aspects of your life and becomes tyrannical. Do you see government assuming jurisdiction over speech, over thought, over belief? In this sphere that now wraps America, born of an unanchored life and nurtured by a victim culture, we continue to cede all authority and jurisdiction and increasingly our freedoms to government, unwilling to stand for the freedoms of those with whom we disagree. Let me stress this point again as I move towards the election. It's vitally important for us to recognize that a nation that claims to be free will not remain long free unless its people have the courage to stand for the freedoms of those with whom we disagree. It is that foundation of a radical middle way in America that has preserved our freedoms through the years. But increasingly, Americans are unwilling to do so, violating two fundamental and foundational principles in American governance and constitutional jurisprudence that protect individual freedom: the separation of government powers and equal protection under the law. or equality before the law. Here are but a few examples in 1 year which should give all of us pause, and which includes governmental conduct in gross deviation from American principles, and which compel freedom-loving persons to take a stand. In the summer of 2020, we witnessed violent acts, which were called speech. And in the fall of 2020, we witnessed speech that was called violence. The only difference between the distinctions was based on whether you were considered a part of or apart from a favored governmental group. We have weaponized regulatory bodies and ethics boards to punish disfavored speech. Our nation's second president, John Adams, was a lawyer. He was elected President of the United States after he represented British soldiers in the Boston Massacre. That's how significant America believed all citizens, whether favored or unfavored, whether condemned by a culture or accepted by a culture, have their individual freedoms and must be protected from the reach of government. But now those representing disfavored causes face ethics complaints, doxing, and removal from employment opportunities. The Attorney General of Michigan looked upon the possibility of criminally investigating lawyers supporting questioning the election favorably and announced so. She also threatened legislators who might question the election with criminal investigation. I was one of the first to be canceled in this nation. In 2015, I had investigated and obtained evidence of rampant criminality within Planned Parenthood of America. I am the only prosecutor in our nation's history to successfully subpoena their records. And so I was attacked by my Supreme Court, appointed by Kathleen Sebelius, who later became Secretary of the United States Health and Human Services under President Obama, and they stripped me of my law license. I still remember the number one complaint that the ethics board made against me, and they claimed that it was unethical for me to investigate abortion clinics because I was pro-life. I said I am also anti-murder, and I investigate murder. I'm anti-rape, and I prosecute rapists. That formula of ethics is nothing but declaring that those with a similar belief of mine have no right to participate in a participatory democracy or hold office. That cancel culture spreads like a cancer through our nation now, enveloping our professions in fear and silencing a people who must speak about the injustice and act to protect the freedoms even of those with whom they disagree. I'd like to take a moment because in that season of my life, it was extraordinarily difficult, as you might imagine, as many are going through now, and there's no way I would have survived it but for my wife standing beside me, and she's here today, Deborah. She's a Michigander from Mason, Michigan. And she's here with her parents, Lauren and Jackie. And now I see happening to others what happened to me. I have also with me one of our attorneys of the Amistad Project, our leader in Michigan, who is doing an outstanding job to promote election integrity and challenge these governors who claim they're no longer part of the lawmaking process, but they are the law. What they wake up and decide in the morning is the law. They have lost faith in the democratic process. There is no reason when democracy can function in your state capitol building and the Senate and the House can meet that a governor has to exercise emergency powers. We are not a single branch of government in the United States. The separation of powers is vitally important for our freedom. And Ian Northen, who has stood with us, has also faced the assault, and I'd like to acknowledge Ian Northen, one of our attorneys who's here, and a Hillsdale graduate, by the way. And another man that I've had the honor of standing alongside is one of your own, who's still here, who's your general counsel, and that's Bob Norton. Thank you, sir, for your leadership. Where are you, Bob? He's here somewhere. His leadership is greatly appreciated. Governor Whitmer, on the day the legislature was slated to exercise their constitutional authority to select presidential electors, falsely claimed a security threat and locked Republicans from the Capitol building, disabling their pass cards to get in and mobilizing state police to prevent Republicans from entering the building, all the while allowing Democrats to enter and meet. We witnessed recently the undermining of civil authority of the military by the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, justified by the personal concerns of the Pentagon leader, bypassing well-tested and constitutional supported avenues to address those concerns. On most of our college campuses, disfavored groups are bullied and silenced as students trade free speech zones for something called safe zones. When for the briefest of moments, America shifted its focus from the color of one's skin to the content of one's character, we have reverted back to measuring persons by skin color with identity politics and critical race theory. And we have the arbitrary and capricious application of law in the United States, undermining equal protection. Leftist governors have regulated everything from how close you can sit to one another, to whether your mask must cover your nose and your mouth, to whether you can attend a funeral of a loved one or visit someone in the hospital. They have regulated every human endeavor and expression unilaterally. And there is no police force in the world large enough to enforce such laws, and no police force willing. So who gets punished but those who raise their voice to challenge the decisions of the government? Because it's not about safety. This nation has never quarantined the healthy. It has protected the vulnerable. It is about authority. And that is why your Attorney General decided to prosecute a restaurant owner, a German immigrant, after she appeared on Fox News and criticized the government, so she was arrested on her way to work within a week. I can give you numerous stories of people that we've represented from this government overreach. Governor Whitmer marches proudly with Black Lives Matter and threatens our client in Michigan, One Nation, a group of urban pastors, with the rest if they gather to express their difference with cancel culture. We cannot stand in freedom and watch the freedom of others be ripped away from an authoritarian government. The shutdowns witnessed the most massive distribution of wealth in United States history, where big tech firms and large box stores were able to accommodate and use money, and they weaponized COVID fear with governmental allies to shut down their competitors and small businesses to the point of bankruptcy. And now we have a corporate oligarchy in America exercising governmental powers. Walmart alone has more revenue than Spain. These corporate oligarchies have decided that you cannot and will not be trusted with information because they must communicate what they believe the truth to be to you. And they censor. And they threaten. And they take those voices which they do not like and bring them actually to ruin and bankruptcy. Because we live in a managed economy that is dependent on such technology now. Everybody got a cell phone? Pull out your cell phone. And you might have turned it off, But I ask you to do something for me. I ask you to go to your favorite news site and click on an ad about something that you're not concerned about, that you've never searched for, on a topic you're not worried about. And do that sometime this evening, and by the time you get home, you will notice that your click on that ad has been sold and the information has been monetized, and you will start to see ads of a similar character with the sites that you visit. We all, in my generation, were concerned about the surveillance state. We now have surveillance capitalism. Every night when you go to bed, your cell phone is communicating all of your decisions through that day. Your Siri has recorded your requests, and they are searching keywords. Google has an algorithm that knows every one of your searches and then catalogs it to be monetized and sold. Facebook knows about your communications with friends. And all of that data has been aggregated not only to have a consumer impact and predict your behavior, but to also alter your behavior and to direct you. In this past election, Facebook teamed up with the Secretary of State of California to work out and dox and remove from Facebook and that platform and other platforms, including Twitter, any information that the Democrat Secretary of State thought was disinformation in the campaign. This type of corporate alliance with government is controlling the way we select our leaders, and it's controlling the information that we receive. And your political rights should not be turned over to a government panel and corporate leaders who are unaccountable to you. And this is happening everywhere. It is teamed up with our administrative state, which is so bloated. At this nation's founding, there were 58 federal laws that were criminal. 5 years ago, a congressman asked the Congressional Research Service to number all the laws, all the criminal laws on the federal books. They came back after 2 years and said, we cannot, they are too numerous to count. I know as a prosecutor, if I wanted to target you, I could use all these algorithms, I could use all this data, and I will make you a felon. Because we have laws on our books that don't even require you to intentionally do a wrong. I'll give you but one example. If your granddaughter or daughter has a Kool-Aid stand and she puts up a sign that says, give a hoot, don't pollute, because people are tossing the cups aside, that is a misappropriation of a federal slogan. It has a $10,000 fine and 5 years in jail. That's just the beginning. With the power of the badge, the government can make any one of you a target, and you are now vulnerable because we have acceded to the surveillance of capitalism for the convenience of our phones. It's a soft Marxism that is being implemented in our country. In China, they are much further along. They have social codes. By every act that a citizen engages in one of these devices, they rate them. And their rating determines whether they can go to college, whether they can travel, what type of job they might have, or whether they're fired from their current job. Do you see the parallels in America today? Do you see that assault on individual liberty? Do you see the secularists building their utopia with dystopian principles to control your thought, to direct your thinking, and to cause you to huff and cower in fear? It happened in our election. Our election was not conducted by government. In the urban core, our election was conducted by a shadow government of nonprofits and was the fruits of over 15 years of Democrat planning or leftist planning. In politics, nothing happens by accident. If it happens, you can bet it was planned that way. I'd really say that this occurred How do I do it? There we go. This occurred over 25 years. In 1995, Congress passed campaign finance reform. And that campaign finance reform, in short, wasn't really reformed. It depowered political parties. So political parties could not impact an election as much as before. And that meant that political parties and their platform were not as important to candidates. And it moved all the money to what's called dark money, where corporate oligarchs and billionaires can direct unlimited amounts of money to affect the elections. And that campaign finance reform was supported and helped written by George Soros in conjunction with a man named Harold Ickes, who was deputy chief of staff to Bill Clinton. And immediately after that bill passed, the left started setting up really scores of nonprofits and what's called 527 dark money organizations to start controlling the recruitment and the election of candidates on the left and eventually our elections as a nation. I want to first mention the machines before I go on with this track, and you heard Mr. Bush speak here earlier. Mr. Bush provided you various poll numbers that he claims were indicative of the election result. And I just got to tell you, the poll numbers were wildly off in predicting the election. And you can't rely on them to prove or disprove any type of fraud. I'll also challenge Mr. Bush in this regard. We are not in an election contest. Right now, we are people trying to hold our government accountable for how they manage the election. These election officials are elected by you or appointed by people you elected. And it stuns me that I have people telling me it undermines democracy for me in a democracy to challenge my government's performance. They have the burden of stepping forward and proving that they followed the law so that we can get our elections right. This is not about winning a battle in court right now. It's about whether our government will abide by the law in the actions that it takes. In this election, it did not. There is admitted lawlessness, and I will walk you through some of that. Now, first on the machines. If you go back to 2017, the left was the one who was claiming that the machines can be hacked and are insecure. I can give you videos from CNN, articles from the New York Times, MSNBC, all of those groups. The impeachment manager of the second impeachment of President Trump in 2019 warned the nation about how the machines were vulnerable to digital manipulation. These machines are used at a gathering called DEF CON every year in Vegas by hackers to test and whether the machines can be hacked. And guess what? It is so easy now that they have high schoolers hack the machines. In Michigan, a professor by the name of J. Alex Halderman got his students to conduct a test. Washington, D.C. was saying, we have unhackable elections. We will challenge you to hack them. So he challenged his students, and when people went and voted in the mock election in Washington, D.C., as they picked their candidate, the machine played the Michigan fight song. The common software used on the machines is by a company called Seidel. They're out of Barcelona, Spain. Just Google, by the way, Google will keep track of this, so watch out. But Google Seidel in Switzerland, and you'll see that the government kicked them out of Switzerland because they found a trapdoor where the election results can be manipulated. The concern is real. But I have to mention, I have not seen any proof of an external hack of this election. And I've reviewed it all. Instead, what I've seen is what I would expect to see. Our election results on election night are aggregated on the cloud, Amazon World Services. So they are uploaded on the cloud. And what is uploaded on the cloud can be brought down from the cloud. And that's how media and foreign governments keep track of what's happening in American elections. And all I've seen is that general traffic that you would expect to occur on election night, where all these media interests are gathering, as well as foreign governments, the information about American elections on the cloud. Now, it should be of great consequence to us that the unofficial results are on the cloud, because Amazon World Services had servers around the globe, and you can hack the cloud and manipulate the unofficial results. And that is a severe concern, but we haven't seen the proof. We were not hacked from without, that I have seen. We were hacked from within. So Mr. Bush's arguments applied to irrelevancies. Our investigation is not about the Chinese president putting an algorithm into every precinct and every machine. The Chinese president sits on a toilet older than the United States. They don't have the need to interfere that way. They have patience as they see our nation crumble from within. We were hacked from within with the knowing collaboration of leftist election officials and leftist nonprofits. The primary problem in the 2020 election was that election policy was determined and implemented by private interests rather than pursuant to state laws and procedures. In the urban core of swing states, America was kicked out of the counting room and billionaires invited in. Billionaires paid the election judges. Billionaires dictated the policies. Billionaires paid the officials who blocked the windows from Republicans and entering in the Cobos Center in Wayne County. It was billionaires that required Philadelphia to have 800 polling places, because Philadelphia goes 85-15 for Democrats in every election. 800 polling places, ballot harvesters against the law, and deputizing leftist groups to harvest ballots and create ballots. It was Zucker boxes. I'll give you but one example. The drop boxes. Zuckerberg paid for them. Over $350 million to one group called CTCL that then turned around and gave that money to government and dictated government policy. That money went to Democrat strongholds in Pennsylvania. Delaware County, just south of Philadelphia, strong Democrat area. There was one Zucker box for every 4 square miles. That's 2 miles by 2 miles square. You could walk down the block and vote. Plus, there were ballot harvesters and 800 polling places. In the 59 counties that Trump won in 2016, there was one Zucker box for every 1,159 square miles. One box for every 70,000 voters, compared to one box for every 5,000 voters in the urban core. Not only that, the governor of Pennsylvania, who we received a judgment against striking down his emergency orders as unconstitutional, closed in-person polling places, naming COVID as the concern. And all of you know Republicans prefer to vote on election day in person. So in Philadelphia and Delaware County, it was almost impossible not to vote, and many people voted without even knowing it. And I'll get to that in a few minutes. But in Republican strongholds, you had to go on a Where's Waldo weekend vacation to find a drop box. That's government putting its thumb on the scale. That's the umpire being paid to call the game one way. That is a two-tiered election system that targets one demographic of people to turn out the vote and another demographic of people to suppress the vote. It is not a new tactic. It is the tactic of the Democratic Party of the Deep South at the turn of the 20th century. It's just the demographics are different. At the turn of the 20th century, they targeted the black vote to suppress the vote and the white vote to turn it out. This election, they targeted Democrat strongholds to turn out the vote and Republican strongholds to suppress the vote, all the while using COVID fear and private monies. Green Bay, Wisconsin, actually 5 cities in Wisconsin, received Zuckerberg dollars Those 5 cities had $47 a voter to turn out the vote. The rest of the areas in Wisconsin, $4 a voter to run the election. We go to Michigan, Genesee County, Flint, Michigan. Genesee County was carried by Trump by a narrow margin in 2016. In Michigan, the county official is the election official. So where did Zuckerberg put his money? Into a county that Trump won, where the election official has the responsibility of running the election? No. He put his money in Flint, where there is no elected official. But there's the mayor. And all of that money went to Flint, Michigan, which Hillary Clinton won overwhelmingly to turn out the vote. Government offices, which are by law to be objective and follow rules and procedures, were turned into partisan campaign turnout the vote centers for the Biden campaign. And if this is not stopped, you will have elections brought to you by Coca-Cola, by the Koch brothers, by the NRA, by every other group that believes they can manage an election to the benefit of their issues. This is not how American government should operate. The corruption of money in this election was not the money in the campaigns. It was the over $1 billion of monies and services provided by a conglomeration of over 20 nonprofits who managed the election in the swing states. I want to take a moment and comment on evidence versus proof. I've coordinated many investigations of criminal enterprises, and I'm sorry, you don't start an investigation by demanding the proof that a crime occurred. You start an investigation with questions. And the American people have a right to ask questions about how the election was run. And election officials must be accountable to those questions. I'm sorry, if I were investigating you for tax manipulation and I arrived at your house on a hot summer afternoon and it was 110 degrees outside and you had all the drapes drawn and you had the doors closed and you refused to open the door and I see smoke coming from the chimney, it means you're probably burning the documents. That's called evidence. When election officials refuse to cooperate with reasonable demands for information about how they managed the election, and when they work to erase information and breach the chain of custody of ballots, and commingle jump drives which allow you to audit machines, all of which we have evidence of, all of which we have affidavits of, that is concerning because you don't violate the law without a reason. In Wisconsin, let me take you into what happened with CTCL and George Soros. By the way, in 2017, John Podesta met with Mark Zuckerberg. And they met because Zuckerberg was wanting to know how to spend his great wealth in a worthy cause. And soon after, Zuckerberg and his chief of staff emailed John Podesta and said, we want your guidance as to what people we can work with and where to put this money. And Zuckerberg announced the Zuckerberg-Chan Initiative, billions of dollars. And soon after hired David Plouffe, Obama's campaign manager. David Plouffe, in a book published in March of 2020, The Citizen's Guide to Defeating Donald Trump, said that the 2020 election will come down to a block-by-block street fight in the urban core to turn out the vote in Philadelphia, in Milwaukee, in Detroit. Guess where Zuckerberg and CTCL put his money? CTCL was running along with about a $1.2 million annual budget. I'm at 30 minutes? 20 minutes. 20 minutes left or 20 minutes in? 20 minutes left. Okay. Thank you. My wife, she's the disciplinarian. So, Zuckerberg's money goes to CTCL. In May of 2020, they start reaching out to Democrat strongholds. They send people into Wisconsin. They send people into Pennsylvania, recruiting mayors to ask them for grants. They write a letter to the mayor of Racine, Wisconsin. Now, they're running about $1.2 million. So they know money's coming, and they say, look, Mayor of Racine, he's a rabid leftist. They said, look, we're going to give you $100,000. You go out and recruit these 4 cities, because these 4 cities are key for a Biden victory. You recruit Racine. You recruit Madison. You recruit Milwaukee. You recruit Kenosha. And we want you to pull them together, come up with your own elections plan, and then you ask us for money. And they did. And that election plan, by the way, was a violation of federal law and the Help America Vote Act, which means that all voters need to be treated equally. And it was a violation of state law, which gives them specific parameters on how to manage the election. And then CTCL poured in money, so much money that in Wisconsin, they hired voter navigators in the urban core. What the heck does that mean? Well, let me tell you what that means. It means government officials going to the home of those who are likely to vote Democrat and helping them complete their ballot. They use sophisticated targeting methods. They use the tools that a campaign would normally use to turn out the vote, but this is government doing it in select areas with private money in violation of state law. That's why we saw the turnout that we saw in some areas. They also eviscerated protections for voter identity. In Wisconsin, they have a law which says that absentee voters must show a copy of their driver's license and copy it before they send in their ballot. But you don't have to do that if you're indefinitely confined. And unilaterally, those governments in those key cities decided that because of COVID, everybody was indefinitely confined and no one had to present an ID for absentee ballots. In Fulton County, Georgia, the money was used to hire officials to run the election of a group called Happy Faces. Happy Faces has ties to Stacey Abrams. They were given instructions. Some of you will be Republicans for the day because the law requires that we have a Republican as part of the counting process. And so those employees, according to an audit done by the Secretary of State of Georgia, who is now seeking to remove Fulton County elections from running their elections because of the flaws and illegalities, they were told, just declare yourself Republican and we will consider you as one. All states have laws that require both parties to be in the counting room. In fact, the United States Agency for International Development, this is the agency that monitors foreign elections, says that elections must be inclusive, meaning both parties or all parties are present to watch the count, transparent, and accountable. And we had the least transparent, inclusive, and accountable election in U.S. history. I'm not sure if many of you know what happened in Wayne County. In Wayne County, your Secretary of State had sent out military ballots on the wrong paper. So when those ballots came back to cast the vote, they would put them in the machine and they would crumple up so the machine could not read them. Now, what the law requires is that a Republican and a Democrat sit down at a table and look at that crumpled ballot and then fill out a new one that reflects the intent of the voter who is overseas in our military. So they say, I believe that was a Biden vote, and put down the Biden vote. I believe that was for this senator, and they put it down, and then they cast the new ballot they completed and count it. You can see why it's prophylactic, why you would have both parties there to ensure that that process was fair. So what happened in Wayne County? Claiming COVID fear, they consolidated the counting center in one room the size of 2 football fields. They created a crowd in the name of COVID. And they had 134 counting tables. And they had one Republican in the cheap seats where they couldn't see what was happening. And in court argued, we have complied with the law because the Republican was in the place of the counting. To which I respond, Michigan is a place. The planet Earth is a place. There are times when you have to consider the purpose of the law and not the literal reading of the law, and the purpose was for fairness and transparency, and Republicans were removed. That happened everywhere Zuckerberg money touched for the first time in U.S. history. Wayne County claims that they couldn't find Republicans to serve. I know better. We signed up Republicans who wrote letters to volunteer and did not get a response. President Trump received 254,000 votes in Wayne County. They certainly could have found Republicans to be at the table. Folks, there are certain measures of law that are prophylactic and prevent election fraud, and those areas of law were not followed. Now I'm going to drill down real quick, and then I'll respond to some questions and tell you a story about Wisconsin. And we're engaged in investigation, not audits. Audits validate fraud. They are narrowly drawn. They don't incorporate taking witness testimony, putting people under oath, and obtaining real evidence of what has happened. And we're trying to do that in several states. And that's what's needed, by the way. In Wisconsin, in Green Bay, the election clerk was a woman by the name of Chris Teskey. I have the emails. I would show them to you, but I'll summarize. Her mayor created his own election group to run the election. It involved outside groups from Illinois, who he didn't know, including a gentleman by the name of Michael Spitzer Rubenstein of the National Vote at Home Institute, which is one of these leftist nonprofits managing our elections. She starts complaining early on, my people are being pushed out, no one's listening to me, I'm not part of the meetings, I can't tell whether these people are going to comply with the law, I don't know what their plans are. 2 days before the election, they force her to take a leave of absence. The hotel contract of the counting center is signed by Michael Spitzer Rubenstein. Not only that, the instructions of the hotel for the counting center in Green Bay are no one gets in and out unless approved by Michael Spitzer Rubenstein. All keys to the counting room are to be delivered to Michael Spitzer Rubenstein. Michael Spitzer Rubenstein is not accountable to you. He's not accountable to the people of Wisconsin. He cannot be defeated for public office. He can't be FOIA'd. You can't do an open records request. You can't ask him how he ran the election because he won't answer, but he and his private interests managed the election in Green Bay, Wisconsin. And it happened elsewhere as well. And it will happen again unless we insist that those who have the responsibility of managing our election process answer the legitimate questions that we have about how they conducted the most lawless election in United States history. Thank you for the honor of speaking with you today.
Thank you, Mr. Kline. We do have time for Q&A. If you have a question, please make your way down to one of the microphones. If a student has a question, they will be given preference.
Thank you, sir. Do you think the congressional Republican attempt on January 6th to toss the electors of several states was A, constitutional, and B, warranted by evidence at the time?
Thank you. I don't believe that the vice president has the authority to unilaterally set aside the electors selected by the state. I know some were making that argument. I don't believe there's any way that such a decision would stand with the United States Supreme Court. I did have conversations with that office, and did encourage the vice president, if he believed and states had expressed a desire for more time, for him to walk out and announce he would give the states more time. Now that would likely result in litigation to resolve really an unprecedented act, an issue of law. But let me say this, all of those deadlines are false deadlines as it relates to the constitutional authority given to the states by the United States Constitution to determine the time, place, and manner of elections and select electors. Those dates, January 6th, the drop dead date, they were based on how long it takes to ride a horse to Washington, D.C. for the electors to gather. It was a statutory construction that cannot overrule the plenary power of the state legislatures. So I believe that the state legislatures had the opportunity, if they desired, and to select the electors. And in fact, that's what the Supreme Court is saying. The Supreme Court was saying prior to the inauguration, essentially, look, first of all, this time frame doesn't allow sufficient evidence of fraud and obtaining that evidence to overturn a presidential election, and we are reluctant to do so. But the authority rests with the state legislatures in their selection of electors. And we have history where states have sent two sets of electors or not sent electors based on disputes of the legitimacy of the election. Now let me add this one thing with Michigan, and it's true nationally. Your legislators don't know their authority. They have no idea what their authority is. They are frightened to exercise that authority. They have delegated all their power to the executive branch to exercise what's called ministerial functions, which means they don't have any discretion. So there is truly no oversight of elections. The best reform that can happen is to force your legislators to step up and be accountable and exercise their authority. That means a standing bipartisan committee with subpoena power that meets during the election process, that's charged with a report on whether the election was conducted lawfully. If not, why not? Was it conducted according to regulation? If not, why not? Can you have faith? Should we certify? That's their job. They need to step up to the plate and accept their responsibility.
Hello. Thank you for the great talk. Wanted to CTCL spending somewhere between $300 and $400 million.
Yeah.
That's an awful lot of money.
Yeah.
Do you know
more than the federal government spent on the election?
No idea.
Mark Zuckerberg alone, $419 million overall.
To your knowledge, is there any sort of forensics audits being conducted on a state level, going after or taking a look into the books of whether it's the governor or the Secretary of State in any of these states where obvious voter fraud occurred?
Yeah.
Is that happening?
Yeah, there are. And let me say this, it's not a forensic audit. You know, this has been misunderstood. Election audits look at a very narrow thing. And what you're going to end up with is a battle of experts talking about whether the paper was foreign or whether it was domestic and whether these machine algorithms are there or not. And America won't agree. What you need
Specifically talking about following the money.
Yes, following the money is where you do it, and I'll tell you how you prove what happened. You have somebody under oath who says, this is what I did, this is why I did it, and this is who paid me. And that requires investigations. It's a lot more broad. I'm not saying audits shouldn't happen. We should do them, but that is not the answer that people claim it is. And it's not as simple as what people claim it is. So yes, those investigations, that's what we're doing, is working those investigations in conjunction with various jurisdictions, law enforcement, as well as state legislative officials. Yeah. It'll take time, but it has to be done. You bet.
Good evening, Mr. Kline. My question revolves around state legislation and national legislation towards voter integrity right now. So there's been a lot of progress with things like the CTCL, ballot harvesting, et cetera, in states like Texas, Florida, and Georgia. But there's currently federal efforts to deter that through policies such as H.R. 1, H.R. 4, and most recently the Klobuchar bill. What do you believe is the proper response from both state and federal Republicans to deter that federal attempt to drown out
Well, first of all,
integrity
defeat
measures?
H.R. 1 and all of those bills, which are codifying the chaos of the 2020 election. Look, we've done investigations. You know the drop boxes? You remember the drop boxes? They were going to have a Republican and a Democrat pick up the ballots because you don't want Johnny Republican or Billy Democrat losing some ballots on the way to the counting center, right? So you have to have them sign in. They were going to have videos. You remember all that? They have none of it. They have none of it. They didn't do any of it in Fulton County, in these urban core centers. And they're trying to codify that approach. Moreover, this is a movement on the left to nationalize all issues, to give the federal government jurisdiction over all decisions, and to move that jurisdiction from actually elected officials to experts, they call them, as if experts don't have the human frailties of partisanship. I mean, it's nuts. We're moving power to the unaccountable group of people, like the nonprofits, to determine policy in a democratic republic. It is insane. But that's their argument. You hear it. Follow the science, right? Follow the science. Science teaches us what is. It doesn't teach us what ought to be. What ought to be is a moral equation. And I'm so glad that science is not the breadth and definition of my freedom, and safety is not the aim, or I'd live in a padded room drinking this green sludge that my daughter purees from the grasses out in the front of our house. That is not the purpose of government. And using that fear to nationalize issues, and I'm sorry, I'm kind of going off for a second, but give me this, this point. Let me tell you, if I run for office and you ask me to keep you safe from offense, I will say the request is offensive. That is not the role of government. The role of government is to protect free speech. And I say if somebody has something stupid to say, give them a platform, and I will stand for their free speech and reason against it. I will not silence them. And this is what we have going on in America today. So we've messed up. We don't understand the role of government. Freedom is a very insecure place in which one finds yourself. And I believe the best problems or solutions to problems are solved by people who experience them and work together and find common ground and solve them at the local level. Washington, D.C. doesn't have, in all those windowless offices, the smartest people in the world. And that comes with every question. Education occurs where a parent and teacher and child interact, not the Department of Education. Solutions are found at the state level, and we need that again in America. So our national politicians, Republicans included, have to stop nationalizing all issues. They have to stop saying, I have a fix, so let me on Fox News. They have to say, no, that is for you to work out. I believe in your freedom. I have faith in you working it out. If we get a Republican Party that stands in that principle, we will go a long ways to restoring freedom. At the state level, what they need to do, it's not complex. You make sure only people who are eligible vote, and then you count the votes. It's not that complex. We need to get rid of the machines. They eliminate transparency. You guys remember Bush v. Gore? You probably don't. Sorry, I do. And you remember the guy holding up the ballot? And we all debated, is a hanging Chad an intended vote? Is a dimpled Chad an intended vote? It was discomforting, but all of us have an opinion because we were in the counting room. And we understood whatever the decision was, it should apply equally at all places. Well, now you got a box. You can't see in the box. You have to have some expert come out and tell you what the box did. And then you can't question the expert. We have 8 vendors of election machines in the United States. It's like we hired 8 people to count all of our votes. And we put them in a windowless room, we shut the door, and they come out and say, we got a winner, congratulations. Oh, I'm sorry, I don't have time for questions, bye. Why have we done so? We do it because media wants election night watch parties. They are impatient. They have advertising dollars. There's no reason under our Constitution to decide the election in one day or one night or 1 week. Inauguration is January 20th. We have the time to get it right and count the votes without the machines.
please join me in thanking Mr. Kline again.